Okay, folks, we'll get started. I'd like to welcome you all to this CARES event, which is being organised by NIPSA's Equality Committee to mark CARES Week. I particularly like to extend a very warm welcome to Craig Harrison from CARES NI, who has kindly agreed to be our keynote speaker. Craig, I know this is a really busy week for you, so we really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to do this session for us. Thank you so much. I'd also like to welcome Tina Craney, who's going to chair the session for us. Colleagues, raising awareness of the issues facing CARES and promoting positive action has formed a major part of the work of the NIPSA Equality Committee over the years. And I'm sure it will continue to be a major focus for us as our newly elected Equality Committee develops its action plan for 2022-23. And in 2018, we launched a sample CARES policy and guidance for branch reps. And I have just posted the link to that guidance in the chat facility. So hopefully you will pick that up. And it's really important, colleagues, during CARES Week, we place a focus on workplaces being more supportive of CARES and use the sample policy and guidance to ensure employers have proper policies and procedures in place to support CARES. And as we know, the COVID-19 pandemic has had a huge impact on the lives of all carers, and especially unpaid carers, and many have provided a significantly increased level of care, and others have taken on new caring responsibilities for loved ones who are disabled, ill, or elderly, and who need support. It is therefore more important than ever for employers and the government to do more to support working carers. And we're going to hear more about how employers and the government can support working carers from Craig in his presentation. But before I hand over to Tina, just to want you to note that I will be opening up the screen to be shared by multiple users, and this is to facilitate the speaker. So please be careful not to share any of your own personal information. And there will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end. So please do keep your questions until then, and to either put the question in the chat facility or use the raise hand symbol. And this will be monitored by the chairperson. We intend to finish no later than 2 p.m. Okay, I'm going just now to hand over to Tina to introduce our keynote speaker. Over to you, Tina.
Thanks, Geraldine. I'm going to keep my video off because I have an unstable internet connection here. So just to hopefully get through this. I haven't much to say. I just thank you for Geraldine for organising this on behalf of the Equality Committee, and know that we're into our new term. This was organised on behalf of the outgoing Equality Committee last year, but obviously it was timed to fit in with Carers Week, so that's why we're having it now. So I'd just like to thank you all for coming, and now I'll hand over to yourself, Craig.
Yep, thank you very much indeed, Tina and Geraldine and everyone for coming along to listen today. I'll just get the slides loaded up, but can you hear me okay just before I launch into War and Peace?
Indeed, Craig, you're coming across loud and clear.
Yeah. If you can't hear me and we get towards the end, you'll just have to take my word for it that it was brilliant. But hopefully you'll hear it anyway. Sorry, 2 seconds. Isn't this always the way? Oh, there we go. Right. So again, is that showing up all right? You can see my slides fully?
Yeah.
Yeah, great.
Craig, if you do from beginning slide, click it again. We're just getting the slides down the side.
Okay. Sorry, you can practice this 100 times, and then when you try to do it for real, it doesn't work, does it? How is that?
Click from the beginning. Yes, that's it now, Craig.
Yeah, that's super. Super. Yes, apologies. I know plenty about cars, but maybe not so much about using Zoom. It seems. So yes, thank you very much indeed for the opportunity to join the event today. I think the number of members who are tuned in is indicative of how important this topic is, and also how much of an impact that caring is having on people and work across Northern Ireland. So I'm just going to talk briefly, I suppose, about the number of carers in work, the barriers to paid employment that arise from a caring role, and then the impact and solutions to those barriers at the policy and practical levels. And I'd be really keen to hear everyone's thoughts and insights on this topic at the end, and of course happy to discuss things further and answer any questions that you may have. But I suppose just to begin with, yep, there we go. I thought it was just worth mentioning quickly what Carers NI is all about. So we are a membership organisation for unpaid carers in Northern Ireland, and we exist really just to try to make life better for them. So we do that by lobbying for policy change in places like Stormont and local government and the health service, by providing information and advice to help people with their caring role, and by delivering the likes of training on a wide range of issues that are related to carers. So for example, this week we've been doing quite a lot of training with employers of different sizes to look at things like the rights for carers in the workplace. And this photo here just illustrates my side of the house, which I suppose is the political engagement piece. So just to sort of make up my pitch at the beginning, I suppose that for anyone who's here today who maybe has a caring role and provides care for someone, please do think about becoming a Carers NI member. There's absolutely no cost or commitment involved to it, and it's really just a way to be able to access some useful information and resources that may be helpful for your caring role potentially. So just to set the scene, I suppose, for today's discussion, Northern Ireland's carer population is now estimated to stand at just over 290,000 adults, and that represents 1 in 5 people who are aged 18 and over here. And I suppose to give you an insight into the scale of that, it means that if every carer in Northern Ireland want to go to watch a football match at Windsor Stadium, they'd have to increase the number of seats there by a factor of 16 to be able to fit them all in. So you're talking about a significant proportion of the population who provide unpaid care in some way to a family member or a friend or a loved one. And the value of care that's provided by this population of people was worth an estimated £19 million every day during the worst of the pandemic. So we're really talking about a group of people who deliver a multi-billion-pound contribution to Northern Ireland, to the public purse, every single year through the unpaid care that they provide. And what we know, I suppose, not only is there more unpaid carers here now than before the pandemic began in 2020, but in many cases the intensity of that care has also increased significantly, due to the impact that COVID's had on the health service. And that's a big issue that I'll circle back to later, I suppose, because it does have a very important bearing on the subject of work and care. And we reckon that about 2/3 of local carers could be women. And again, I think that's relevant to this discussion because women, of course, already face, unfortunately, additional barriers and challenges to engaging with the labour market. And oftentimes, if you put a caring role in on top of that, then it makes it even harder still, unfortunately. In terms of levels of employment, the less than half of the unpaid carers who responded to the Department for Community's last Family Resources survey said that they were in work, whether that was full, part-time or self-employed. And that was nearly 20 percentage points lower than the general adult population in that same survey. And I think that puts into very stark terms the uneven playing field that exists for accessing work for people who are in the carer population. And those numbers, I suppose, are no surprise when you consider all of those significant barriers to employment that unpaid carers may face. So I suppose at a broad level, in many cases, caring is a round-the-clock job, 24/7. And people in that situation will often find it very difficult to, provide practical and emotional support for the person, manage their appointments, cook their meals, help them get changed, maintain the house, maybe look after other people like young children, and go to work all at the same time. And people in that situation need an awful lot of support to be able to juggle those two roles, their work and their caring role. And high quality replacement care, whether that's paid carers coming to the house or access to things like day centres and respite, it's really important to sort of give people that support. Those type of services can, I suppose, give carers the time and the space that they need to do a wide range of things, but including going to work. But what we've been seeing for a number of years is that so many carers are not being able to access those services they need. So even before the pandemic, a fifth of carers in Northern Ireland didn't receive any support at all in their caring role. And among those who did, many had been seeing, I suppose, quite a serious reduction in the amount of care received from the health and social care system, even before COVID disrupted things so much more. And the pandemic, if I can emphasize anything, it's the pandemic really has made this situation so much worse. We've seen so many services that were reduced or closed in March 2020 and have just yet to fully reopen. So, for example, half of carers here have faced a reduction in access to day services since the pandemic began, and over a third have experienced a reduction in access to short breaks. So I suppose as far as access to that replacement care is concerned, the situation now is maybe worse than it's ever been for some carers. And that's a really prime example of how the gaps that are in the social care system can have a really direct impact on something which is seemingly unrelated. That question of being able to go to work and enjoy financial security. The lack of access to replacement care is really directly linked to that when it comes to the carer population. And beyond that, I suppose it's also the case that the social security system is also really not living up to the mantra of making work pay when it comes to our carer population. So if you look at the main carer benefit, which is carer's allowance, not only is it worth absolute buttons really for considering the really stringent criteria, but it also imposes one of the most extreme cliff edges in the whole benefit system when it comes to paid income. And if a carer earns over a single penny, beyond the earnings threshold, which is £132 a week, then they lose their entire carer's allowance payment. And similarly, whenever the benefits operating was delivered in April of this year, the earnings limit wasn't risen at the same pace as the national living wage. So even for carers who were earning the national living wage, that meant a real terms cut in the number of hours they could work without losing their carer's allowance payment. And all of these issues are really forcing carers to make some very difficult decisions, I suppose, when it comes to working. So some are able to stay and work, but face the real extreme pressure of juggling that with their caring role, and oftentimes with little or no support to do it. And that really just pushes so many working carers to the point of even greater exhaustion, even greater burnout, and results in even greater detriments to their health and well-being. And in these scenarios, something that we see far too often is carers having to use things like their holiday entitlement, or even unpaid leave or sickness absence from work to tend to their caring responsibilities. And what that means, if they're using holidays, that depletes the time that they have left to try to take a proper break. And it has an impact on their health. It makes it worse. If they're going off on unpaid leave, it just puts more pressure on them financially. And so many people, just aren't in a position to be able to afford that at the moment. And for a whole lot of carers, I suppose, for entirely understandable reasons, this situation contributes to a position where staying in work full time while also caring just isn't an option. And we estimate in that sense that in 2019, nearly 130,000 people in Northern Ireland either give up work or reduce their hours to part-time so that they could provide care for someone. And these barriers to work are certainly one of the contributors toward the financial hardship and poverty that many working carers in Northern Ireland are facing at the minute. So, we're all aware of the cost of living crisis, which is making it really hard to get by for so many people. But I suppose an important point to note is that many unpaid carers faced quite severe financial pressures, a long time before things started getting worse during the last year. And when you combine that with an inability to work full time or an inability to work at all, it really is a recipe for disaster. So for example, carers already faced higher costs for things like energy and travel and food because of the needs of the person they were supporting, even before all those costs started to really skyrocket. We also had one NIPSA member got in touch and asked me to highlight the issue of housing adoptions, which we know are impacting on so many. And this member, they provide care for one of their parents, and the parent requires a housing adoption after being diagnosed with a life-limiting illness. But the carer wasn't able to get one of the grant schemes that exist to help people with the cost of housing adoptions because they're a working carer and they therefore fell outside of the means tested criteria for that particular grant. And I think that's just one example among many that really illustrate the financial pressures that working carers face and really the shortage of options that are available to them to help them through that. So I suppose when carers faced those high costs already, and with living expenses like energy and food and petrol, continuing to rise, so many carers unable to work or work full time, we end up in a situation where they're really struggling to get by and having to make some really difficult choices, just to survive each month. So whether that's carers getting into debt, using their savings, using credit cards, relying on overdrafts, or even cutting back on essentials like skipping meals, having to use food banks. These are all real life scenarios that we've seen from local carers in Northern Ireland. And I think that situation and the situation even just described in some of the data points on this slide, it's a real scathing indictment, I think, of the lack of financial support for working carers in Northern Ireland. And it really underlines why we need to be doing so much more to tackle some of these issues. And that leads me, I suppose, to the policy priorities the carers and I want to see delivered during this Assembly mandate. Now, so much of that, unfortunately, depends on a functioning executive, and there's certainly other interventions that aren't on this list that would also make a massive difference. But I suppose this we think would be a really good starting point to help alleviate some of the financial pressure and poverty that's facing unpaid carers in Northern Ireland. So firstly, we'd really like to see legislation to introduce paid carers leave for those carers who are in work locally. We think that should be for 5 days fully paid leave, with the staged increase to 10. It should be a day one right for everybody. And it's just something, I suppose, that would give them some of the time and space that they would need to tend to the current tasks that they have, without having to use holiday pay, without having to go off on sick, without having to go off on unpaid leave. The idea is very popular among the carers that we've spoken to. And they think that if that existed, it would help them to stay and work for longer, to maintain that really vital household income, that we're all relying on so much during the current cost of living crisis. Now, I suppose I can almost hear the gasps of employers across Northern Ireland at the mention of paid caring leave. But I think it's really important to highlight that this policy would also be a good thing for them as well. Because, we know that employers face really high costs for things like absence and lost productivity and recruitment whenever their staff aren't able to work or their ability to work is impacted by caring responsibilities. And we do have some evidence, for example, that shows that the impact of staff turnover, absence, and stress as a result of juggling work and care without proper support is costing businesses in the UK over £3.5 billion every year. So this policy, I suppose, isn't only the morally and the right thing to do, but it could also bring massive business and economic benefits as well. Elsewhere, and as I talked about earlier, fixing the gaps in the social care system is absolutely essential for carers for quite a wide range of reasons. And one of them certainly is that it would give them a better chance of having the time and space that they need to go to work if they wish to. Now, returning social care provision to pre-COVID levels is a minimum first step, but we need to go so much further beyond that as well, and really deliver the root and branch reform of the social care system that's been talked about here for so many years. Obviously, the Department of Health have a consultation out on that at the moment, but again, that's not going to be able to be progressed without a sitting executive. Turning to the benefit system, and as well as increasing just the value of carers allowance significantly so that it's risen, in line with inflation, for example. I think we also desperately need to see reform of that earnings threshold. And our proposal there is to raise the earnings threshold to at least 16 hours a week at the national living wage rate, with future threshold rises then happening in line with parallel increases in the national living wage. Some sort of taper or run on, I think, would also be quite important, just to get rid of that immediate sort of cliff edge that exists whenever a carer earns slightly more than the threshold. And I'm almost struggling to believe I'm saying this, but even universal credit, with all of its horrendous faults and issues, that still has a taper to allow people to earn more without losing all of their payment. So something similar for carers allowance, I think, would be warmly welcomed. From a more practical point of view, we'd like to see the right to request flexible working arrangements become a day one entitlement for all carers across different sectors of the economy. I think if we can take one silver lining from COVID, maybe it's that it demonstrated that the traditional 9 to 5 in an office way of working just isn't always necessary. People have been working more flexibly, been working at home, and a lot of them have been able to do it very well. So, there's no reason that in the right circumstances that we can't apply that to our carer population and just give them a bit more freedom, I suppose, in their working arrangements so that they can take some of the pressure off them when they're trying to juggle work and caring at the same time. And lastly, I highlighted earlier the large number of carers who are leaving work due to the demands of their caring role. And at some point, that caring role for some of those people may change or it may end. For example, if the person they're caring for maybe passes away, or if they move into somewhere like a nursing home to be cared for instead. And at that stage, the carer may want to go back to work, but it can be very, very difficult to re-enter that labour market, if you've been away for any length of time. And I'm thinking especially for those carers who may have been providing care away from work for years or decades even. The job market that they're going to be trying to get back into is drastically different to the one that they left. So we would be really keen to see some dedicated resource and dedicated funding for employability support for these carers, just to really give them the best chance possible of getting back to work if they ever wish to. Now that, I suppose, is a run through of the policy platform that we're advocating to help working carers in Northern Ireland. And I suppose, like any campaign of that nature, we need as much help as possible. So I'm just going to finish today by, I suppose, throwing a few asks back out there to those in the room and to the wider NIPSA membership, because I am a big believer in the power of trade unions to affect change. And I promise Geraldine didn't twist my arm to say that. I do genuinely believe it. So I suppose in that sense, I would encourage you, if you think these proposals make sense and that they're good ones, think about writing to your MLAs. You can tell them how important these things are. Tell them how much working carers are struggling, and how badly they need legislative change to help them juggle work with their caring role. Because, when those MLAs, when decision makers start to hear more and more about these things from their constituents, that's when they do really start paying attention. One of the few sort of parliamentary mechanisms that are operating at the moment are all-party groups, and we do have an all-party group on carers. So again, encourage your MLAs to join that and really put their shoulder to the wheel of some of those cross-party efforts that we're trying to coordinate to deliver change for carers through that all-party group. You could also support what we're trying to do more widely, maybe by using your voice on social media, just talking to your followers and the people you know about the issues that we've discussed today and what potentially some of those solutions could be. Carers NI also runs a campaigning coalition group of stakeholders who support carers in different ways. Now, those are mostly charities, and we don't have any trade union members yet, but I'd be really keen for that to change and would be absolutely delighted, of course, if NIPSA could become the first trade union member of that. So maybe that's something worth considering as well. And just finally, more broadly, the more evidence, the more data, the more stories that we have about the experiences of working carers, the easier it's going to be to convince decision makers that change is needed. So if you're a working carer and if you've experienced any of these issues that I've discussed today, or something else that's related to juggling work with your caring role, please do get in touch. Feel free to tell us your story. Fill in the next State of Caring survey that we'll be launching in July, and which will have questions on work and caring, and help us, I suppose, add and build that evidence base and make an even stronger case to MLAs, to ministers, etc., about the need for change in Northern Ireland for working carers. Any help at all that NIPSA as a trade union or you as individual members can give to these campaigns would certainly make, an absolutely massive difference, for sure. So I think I'll just leave it there and just end by saying again, just thank you for taking the time out to join the event today. Thank you for marking Carers Week in this way and, recognising the importance of carers by organising the event. I hope that, this can be the continuation of a good sort of collaboration between Carers NI and NIPSA. Hopefully can keep coming back to you, not just during Carers Week, but, throughout the rest of the year as well. So we can keep working together and keep collaborating to make life better for working carers across Northern Ireland. Thank you very much indeed. And back to you, Geraldine.
Thank you, Craig. I'm going to hand over to Tina, Craig, to take any questions from participants. But before I do, Craig, just want to thank you so much for that excellent presentation. And obviously the key asks at the end will be very much, I'll obviously bring them back to our Equality Committee and we will discuss those. And we have a really good relationship with Carers NI and have had over the last number of years, and we will certainly be keeping to keep working collaboratively with yourselves in achieving those policy aims. So if there's any issue or any action you want us to take, Craig, please don't hesitate and send it through to us, and we will engage with our membership on those campaigning issues. So thank you so much indeed. Tina, do you want to come in?
Thank you, Geraldine. And I'd like to echo Geraldine's thanks, Sir Craig. That was an excellent presentation. And as Geraldine said, there's definitely things that we can take away and hopefully get our trade union to support and to campaign for. I'm also on the NIPSA Civil Service Group Executive, so I think possibly we can maybe look about having motions towards our conference this year in November to possibly have the carers leave is something that we're going to campaign for within the civil service, and then hopefully that can sort of set the bar for other employers to try and lift. Now I did lose connection again there, so I had to log back in. So I'm not sure if there's any questions in the chat, but I'm happy enough if you want to raise your hands or put anything in the chat if you'd like to address to Craig, or even just in general. Okay, Lucia Collins, go ahead.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks, Craig, for that very insightful presentation. I've a few questions. Maybe if you want to keep them to the end to answer, or I'll just I'll go through them. I have a case at the minute, which is in relation to caring for autistic children, and the children are young, so one of them hasn't been statemented yet. So the lady in question has not had any or much support outside of her own family. So my question on that was, and I know the Northern Ireland Civil Service at this time doesn't have a policy on working outside normal business hours, but I'm wondering, with Zoom and with the fact that so many people are working from home and the fact that the systems are available at night time, would that be something that could be that you could support in terms of lobbying for it? Or the normal 9 to 5 day is your 7:45 day, and then but some people, well, this lady in particular has the children will not stay with anyone else, so she does her 4 hours in the morning and 2 in the evening. She's on a 30-hour week part-time, can't afford to go any less than 30 because of her circumstances. So that was one question. The second one then, about carers, about yourselves. Are you NIPSA members? Are you Carers NI, or are the workers in Carers NI NIPSA members? And then the third question, in relation to, sorry. Oh, I thought somebody said something there. Sorry.
No, go ahead. I think somebody just had unmuted themselves by mistake.
All right, okay. And the third question then was in relation to NIPSA becoming the first trade union that would, be members of Carers NI. And I, as a member of the Equality Committee, I would love that we would be able to do that, and just to ensure that going forward under the new kind of hybrid working and whatever that's going to be in the civil service, that we must get these extended policies. We must get policies enhanced and get a better provision for people, because as you have said, the COVID pandemic has highlighted, and it may have helped in terms of working from home, but it's certainly, it has also heightened the situation for a whole lot of people. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for the questions. I'll maybe not answer in the order you've asked, if that's okay, but some straighter answers or shorter answers, sorry, than others. So as far as Carers NI staff, I think we maybe give the impression sometimes that the staff group here is bigger than it is, but there's only actually the two of us. There's myself and someone who works within our admin team. So we aren't a terribly big staff group, to be honest. I don't know what that other colleague's sort of arrangements are as far as trade union membership. I'm not a member of a trade union, to be honest, mostly because I've never been quite sure which one fits within my job sort of bracket. But just to say, I suppose, on a personal foot, not speaking on behalf of Carers NI, but me personally, I'm big fan of the movement, I suppose. I'm actually half English, and one of my grandparents was a coal miner in Yorkshire during the 70s and 80s. So I suppose you can appreciate the solidarity that I have with the movement in that sort of context. On the flexible working bits, you're absolutely right. That's a perfect example of why I sort of right to ask for that right from the beginning if someone's employment is so important. And indeed, if you look at the specific case of someone caring where there's autism involved, one of the most important components there is a routine. You know, people living with autism, they really need they sort of value and they put a lot of weight behind the daily routine that they're in. And if someone is being expected, I suppose, to be in the office on a sort of stringent time every day, it might not fit that routine and therefore doesn't suit anybody's needs. So I think for sure, whether it's in the civil service or really any other sector that exists out there, 100%, think it's so important that we can deliver those entitlements to request flexible working arrangements whenever someone is a carer. So 100%, you know, behind that, as it's sort of set out in the slides. And then I think the final question was just on the Carers Coalition. As I said, that is at the moment made up of quite a wide range of different charities which support, you know, quite a diverse range of groups, but, you know, the groups that have caring responsibilities. So, you know, from Marie Curie and that end of life space right through to Stroke Association and everything in between, different condition specific groups. But what I think is missing from that is the voice, as I said, of this movement. You know, you represent so many people. You've been so successful at affecting change before. And, you know, if 1 in 5 people, 1 in 5 adults, sorry, is a carer in Northern Ireland, and you translate that to NIPSA's membership, I don't know how big that is, to be honest, but I imagine it's you're talking thousands and thousands of people. You know, there's a whole lot of carers there within that potentially. So it would, you know, certainly from my point of view, would be absolutely delighted for NIPSA to become a member of the coalition. As I said earlier, there's no cost or commitment to it involved, really. We're just a sort of collective of campaigning groups that want to make life better for carers. So it might fit really well, potentially.
Thank you very much, Craig.
Thanks, Craig. That's very helpful. I see someone has in there, Rushing from NIPSA, has in the questions in the chat. How are you registered as non-paid care? Some things require a card, and then also about the carers passport. I know the carers passport is something that came in with the Equality Act in Britain, but isn't actually got legal status here in Northern Ireland. What is the position in Northern Ireland? Do you know?
Yeah, I think and this is almost going to be a slightly contradictory answer, but the sort of gateway, I suppose, to being registered. Well, I suppose every trust, depending on what trust you're living in, every health trust here has a voluntary carers register, but there is a very defined limit to what that does and what you can get out of it. Really, you know, anyone can join up, and it's really just to be added to the mailing list so that you receive sort of information and advice that the trust send out from the likes of their care coordinators. But as far as when it comes to trying to access support, which I think is more important, you know, then obviously that information and advice is very important. But in terms of actually getting access to statutory supports, what I would say that the gateway to that would tend to be to go through a carers assessment first. You know, that's the way to sort of make yourself known as a carer to the trust, and then you'll be able to get an appointment set up with the likes of a social worker or someone similar to go through the Northern Ireland Single Assessment Tool and go through all of your range of needs in that caring role. Now, the contradictory bit, unfortunately, to that is that you can have a whole lot of needs identified through an assessment, and the trust isn't under any obligation to meet those needs, unfortunately. You know, there is a legal entitlement to it in places like England. Once you go through an assessment, whatever the need is, you get services put in place to meet it. That doesn't exist here, unfortunately. So we do have an awful lot of carers who have become disillusioned with the process, you know, and said they've been through an assessment, sometimes repeated assessments, and it hasn't made any difference to them. And that again is one of those issues in the social care system that really needs to be fixed. But as far as, you know, if you're new to a caring role or you've been doing it for a while but just aren't known to your trust, you know, maybe going through a social worker and getting an assessment would probably be a sort of wise first step.
Okay, thank you for that. There's a question there in the chat too from Denise asking the proposed legislation for carers paid leave. Have you a definition for that, and is there criteria? Because as she says, for those who have quite a major caring work as well.
Yeah, Well, I think in my opinion, the ideal scenario would be that you wouldn't exclude people on the basis of having to meet, some. You compare it to the likes of carers allowance, you have to be providing a minimum of 35 hours care per week to be entitled to that. And that to me isn't very fair, because you have people who can be providing anything up to that, or maybe if it's even just a few hours a week, doing helping someone with the sort of daily tasks that they couldn't manage without, like cooking their meals, collecting their prescriptions, etc. Those are all very important current tasks. And just because you don't meet a sort of stringent and defined threshold, you're not entitled to that financial support, which I don't think is very fair. So the ideal scenario, and what we're going to be aiming for, sort of shooting for the stars, I suppose, from the beginning, and hopefully we're not negotiated down too far by government, would be, anyone that has a caring role, a good place to start. You look at those lists of people who have went through an assessment. That's a good place to start. People who are receiving carers allowance, you can add all that together as well. But even those who fall outside of that, anyone who provides care according to what, there's an accepted definition of being a carer, which is really just someone who provides support for a family member, a friend, or a loved one with activities that they couldn't do without support. That definition of a carer is quite sort of agreed. It's quite widely recognized. And in my opinion, anyone who falls underneath that ought to be entitled to that paid carers leave from work. Now, obviously, the government might have a very different opinion to me on that, but I think when we're campaigning for this, we ought to be aiming for the absolute, gold star provision. And then hopefully, suppose I would compare Geraldine to the likes of the bereavement leave stuff. Campaign for the absolute maximum we can, and hope we can capture as many carers as possible within that.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I also know, as having had caring responsibilities in the past too, and being a contingency plan for the full-time care, I wasn't the full-time care, struggling within the civil service to get leave, because the civil service in some areas are stringent on the policy of having contingency plans. And when I am the contingency, it's very hard to have another contingency. So there's a lot of ignorance, I think, that needs to be myth busted to show that, while there is carers and full-time carers, but there's also then those who have to do backup as well. And
Yeah.
they need protection in their workplaces too.
No, absolutely. And I think that's a great example of why the sort of guidance that would be attached to such a piece of legislation would be really important, because,
Yeah.
a lot of employers, regardless of the sector, I suppose, they would have even the likes of a policy of how far in advance you have to book leave, say. And I understand where that comes from to quite a large extent. But of course, when it comes to caring responsibilities, you don't have the luxury very oftentimes of knowing in advance. If an emergency happens, someone has if for talk's sake, you're caring for an elderly parent, they have a fall, during the middle of the day, just to use one example. Can't prepare for that in advance or plan it. So the paid carers leave was one element of it, but being able to take that flexibly and in a way that isn't so stringent and predefined, I think would be a really important component of it as well.
Yeah, I just see there Janet has put in the chat about using leave for appointments. I think that's another issue, is that unless it's an emergency in the civil service anyhow, unless it's an emergency, you won't get leave for anything. So it has to be a last minute thing. So if it is appointments that you have planned for, you don't get leave, especially for that. You have to use your own or unpaid leave. So if we have a policy, that would help.
Yeah, absolutely. And even in examples like that, that sort of type of leave for the likes of medical appointments, that ought to exist, not so that you can go and fulfill roles as a carer. It ought to be, if you, for example, have a medical appointment and you need to take leave at short notice, that's what that's supposed to be for. But having to use it for other things then diminishes the entitlement for when you yourself need it. And one of the big issues we see is carers, because so many of them are completely selfless and they just put the person they're caring for first, then they neglect their own health and their well-being and not attending appointments. And even sometimes quite major things like surgeries. That's not uncommon. We see that with carers all the time, because they don't have the time to take away to go and engage in that sort of thing. They don't have the time to take away from work. And that the Janet's comment there is a perfect illustration of how that happens, because people are having to use it for carers' responsibilities rather than for what it's actually intended for.
Okay, thank you. Gillian, do you want to make a comment or have a question?
Hi, Tina. It is just really to back up what you had said about contingencies and work. I found myself, you know, as a carer for a child with autism, as well as a younger sibling as well. Being an only child myself with no brothers, no sisters, no cousins, whatever, and having to go, you know, for things to do with autism with the children. My father had a stroke. My mother didn't keep good health, and I found myself very much on my own, using leave, and I didn't find workplaces very supportive of that. You know, they were constantly watching your times coming in. There was no leeway at all, you know, and I struggled for years with them saying, you need a contingency. And I said, where do you expect me to get it from? You know, I don't have any family. Where do you get it? You know, you can't ask your neighbor, can you watch my children while I do this, whatever, you know. It was really, really difficult.
It makes your work life twice as hard, doesn't it?
And it does, and it affects your own mental health and your, you know, your own well-being. And I struggled for years and years with it, you know. I still have times, but the children are up a wee bit now, you know, but again, I just don't have that support, you know. I'm in a good place now at the minute where my line manager is very supportive, but prior to that, there was people that just made your life absolute misery, you know.
Exactly, yeah. I understand and I feel your pain too, Gillian.
Thank you.
With a positive note there in the chat from Choppy, who says that his dad's GP referred him to a social key worker after his diagnosis, who also checks his own Choppy's needs as a carer, as well as his dad's condition. So that's very good to hear and positive. Laura's asking, with everyone going back into offices soon, is there a carers form that we can fill in to let our employers know that we are carers?
Is that working?
Not that I am
Yeah.
aware of, to be honest. And I think this maybe, I sort of mentioned earlier that each trust has its own voluntary carers register, and this, you know, just that example and many others actually speaks to why we need something more robust than that which is Northern Ireland wide, and which has sort of clear definitions in the sense of a carers register. And I suppose a good example to understand why that's needed, if you remember back last year or the first year of COVID, I can't remember which, but the Department of Health wanted to make a £500 payment to unpaid carers to sort of recognise the additional load that they were taking on during the pandemic. And one of probably the single most important reason why that was never delivered and eventually abandoned is because they couldn't work out exactly who would be entitled to it, you know, who our carers were. They couldn't just rely on the carers allowance list for the reasons that I've said, because that misses out a whole lot of people who don't provide the number of hours or maybe are older, for example, and if they get state pension, they probably won't get carers allowance at the same time. So there's a number of reasons why we need a much more robust register of all carers in Northern Ireland. And, you know, Laura's question there, I think, is just one more benefit that would bring.
Thanks, Craig. I know, and as I say, I keep referring to civil service because obviously that's the area that I work. I'm not sure, because obviously you may not know, Craig, that NIPSA covers all public sector areas, so we cover education, health, local government. So, but I know in the civil service we had been campaigning to have a carers allowance policy, and I wasn't on the trade. I was on the trade union side for a while. It was covering that, and it hasn't. I was off it for now I'm back on it again. Anyhow, long story short, I think we are. I'll check up to see where we're at in having that progress through. Now, it obviously wouldn't be as robust or cover as much as what you've covered today, but it would bring together maybe the policies for carers within the civil service and make it easier for the staff there to be able to find it. Do we have any other questions or comments then for Craig or in general either?
Tina, can I maybe just come in on the back of that question about advising your employer that you are a carer?
Yeah, go ahead, Geraldine.
Just to say in our guidance that we have for our branch reps that I just posted a link to in the chat facility, obviously we are encouraging employees who are carers to disclose to their line manager that they are caring for someone. I mean, there's no requirement to do it, but obviously if they feel they would like to disclose that to their line manager, then, you know, hopefully then they would get support from their line manager in terms of their current responsibilities. And obviously they can approach their trade union rep if they want to have a chat with them about disclosure and what support they can avail of within their own employment area. And examples of systems of identification that we have put in the guidance is obviously the carers register. One example of a more formalized system of identification is having a carers register, and obviously similarly operating a voluntary carers passport scheme where employees hold a record detailing their individual needs and working arrangements is another example of how, you know, you would be able to notify your employer of your current responsibilities. And that carers passport, you can take that with you and throughout, you know, if you move within departments or sectors within your own organization. So that's just information that we have in that guidance that might be helpful for our members and our branch reps to take note of.
Geraldine, can you reissue the link, because if they joined after you put the link up, you don't see it again. So if you wouldn't mind putting it back up into the chat.
Absolutely, will do. Yeah.
We have another question then from Denise asking about appointments, because they are caring for someone with Alzheimer's and have no one else to take the person to appointments, but they are also made out to them as well, because they're the ones that have to take their family member to the appointment. Any views on how they cover that?
Just from my point of view, I'm not terribly sure, to be absolutely honest. Other colleagues here from the sort of trade union perspective may have experience with that, but I'm not terribly sure. I'm afraid. Sorry, Denise.
I think, Denise, if it depends on your workplace, whereabouts you work as well. So if you want to contact us separately, maybe we can have a conversation about that and point you hopefully in the right direction for it. Carers passport, I think, Fiona, that Geraldine has covered that with the guidance. Lucia, were you looking back in?
Yes, thanks, Tina. It was just to, I had put a wee note in the chat there about when you're representing cases. I know this is a civil service again that we're talking about, but I would always ask for paid special leave first, and the provision's there and they can give it. I mean, I would usually ask somebody if they'd had special leave this year or how much special paid leave they've had, and I'd be really surprised to hear some people saying they haven't had any at all. You know, they're using their own time for all these carers appointments, and the provision is there within the special paid leave. I know, Craig, you were saying it's there for your own personal appointments, but you can ask. And just within the last few weeks, I got a lady a week's paid special leave for a crisis with her children. And, you know, if you don't ask, you won't get. And if a line manager's telling you, well, that's special unpaid leave, you can have that, challenge them on it. So it was just to add that in there. Thank you.
Yeah, just on that, and I see Janet has come back in to say, normally if it is an appointment that you know about in advance and it's not for yourself, it is difficult to get approval for special leave within the civil service anyhow. I'm not sure how other can work on it, but Janet, if you want to get in touch with a rep, maybe we can help support you through anything that you're struggling with. Hopefully you can still hear me because the skies have just opened outside and it's got very loud. Geraldine,
Yeah,
are we
Tina,
sharing the slides?
Tina, I just want to come back on that about special paid leave in the civil service, and it's in other employment areas as well that NIPSA has negotiated. But I think that goes to the very heart of what Craig is saying in terms of campaigning for specific CARES leave, paid CARES leave as a day one right, so that that ambiguity or that test that you have to meet in order to get special paid leave will not be a hurdle that CARES will have to overcome if we're going to be able to achieve this policy objective of getting legislation for paid CARES leave as a day one right and at earnings related pay. So as a campaigning issue, we in NIPSA will certainly be working alongside CARES, ANI and others to lobby the Assembly in relation to that specific issue, just like we did in relation to the domestic abuse safe leave bill. And that was a great success for NIPSA and obviously Rachel Woods, who took forward that bill to get 10 days paid leave for people who have experienced domestic abuse. So it'll be a similar aim and a similar campaign in relation to CARES leave.
Thanks, Geraldine. And the slides, will we?
Yes, after this event,
Yep.
Tina, we will issue a copy of the slides, but we will also issue the recording to participants as well. And I know a number of people have asked who were due to attend here today if the event was going to be recorded, and if so, could they get a copy of the recording? So we will be doing this after the event. We'll send it out to everyone.
Okay, and as Craig says, like yourself, Geraldine, this highlights why we need a statutory provision within our to support the carers and to take away this ambiguity about leave, and for people who are using their own leave that should be for rest and relaxation. They never seem to get it then because it's don't mean wasted, but it's used up looking after their dependents. Will there be a template letter, Craig, to help us write to the MLAs, or maybe Geraldine can take that forward for us?
There isn't one in existence at the moment, but it's a cracking idea. So I shall 100% get that if there's an appetite to do that. I'll get something written 100% and pass it to Geraldine for distribution, perhaps.
Yeah, well, as you're saying about figures, we have over 40,000 members in NIPSA, and as you're saying, if there's if 1 in 4 of them are a carer or they know carers, I think we could get a good bit of voice and strength behind any campaign.
Absolutely.
Gillian, your hand is still up. Was that just from earlier? Are you looking to come back in again?
Oh no, apologies. I should have taken that down.
No, that's fine. I just didn't want, in case you had something else to add. That's fine.
No, sorry about that.
You're quite okay. Anything else anybody would like to comment or add? Lots of thanks, Craig, and the messages there, and everybody seems to be finding your information very helpful, so that's good. I don't think we have anything else. So in that case, are we happy that we can wrap this up and maybe let you all get off a wee bit earlier to get something to eat? Just, Craig, thank you very, very much for your presentation. And hopefully, as you say, we can work very closely together to try and build on the campaign for a strategy right for carers and for paid leave and for all the other protections that we need to help us support people who are carers in work. Because as we know, it's a very difficult job for people, and it's hard to juggle with work, and it's very little financial reward. So every little bit will help. Geraldine, anything